First, I want to thank everyone for having me and for coming out. I'm sure you all had to cancel your church plans, so. The title of my most recent book is Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist, The Guide to Coming Out as a Non-Believer. So people ask a lot about my personal background, so I'd like to tell you a little bit about that first. I was raised by 2 Christian parents and 2 Christian grandparents, and I attended church just like most people who were raised in Christian homes as a kid. I went to church every Sunday. I mostly remember lots of singing and candy, lots of candy as well. Looking back, I feel like most of the candy and singing was a way to get us on their good side, just my personal experience growing up in the church. But I never actually believed in any religion. I was never religious at all, so it makes people ask questions when my book is titled Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist. But it's actually more than just talking to parents, and it's more than just being formally religious, because we live in a society that's largely dominated by religion. And when you live in a society like that, it does make it difficult even just to be an atheist, even when you're from a fairly non-religious family, or you just never believed, like was the case with myself. I told my family when I was about 13 that I didn't actually believe in religion and that I was just going to church as sort of an objective observer. I sort of viewed myself as, in hindsight, I see it as an anthropological approach that I took to religion. I was really interested in going. I really wanted to know why everybody believed what they did, and I didn't want to simply disregard it all because I didn't believe in it. I wanted to learn more about it, and I kind of took that mentality on as I got older. So my parents do still both love me. This is them. My dad is what I would call a cultural Christian. He identifies as a Christian, and I wouldn't say that he knows very much about the faith or the baggage that comes along with the label, but that's very similar to many people in America, especially today. My mom, who used to be a Jehovah's Witness, is now a self-proclaimed agnostic non-believer, and that's as a result of reading my books, and she keeps up on my Facebook page. She's one of my most frequent contributors, which is awesome. She always says she's my #1 fan. So they do still love me, which is awesome. And both of them, I would say, are really big fans of my work. And I like to show this to people because it really gives a sense of my home life. A lot of us are really happy people, have great families, great friends, great lives. But when people hear the word atheist, that's not typically what jumps into their head. I want to talk a little bit about religious studies because that's my background. I went to school, I went to UC Santa Barbara and majored in English and religious studies. And to be clear, I wasn't studying Christianity and I wasn't studying any specific religion. I was looking at religions from a phenomenological and anthropological approach, looking at comparing different faiths, comparing the creation myths, looking at the creation myth for Christianity alongside those of Indian and Native American creation myths as well. It's one of the most interesting fields of study, and I encourage it because it really helps people give up religion in many cases. I've seen, as I was studying religion in college, I saw a lot of my fellow students who were interested in religious studies foremost because they came from a religious family and because they thought that that would help foster their faith. But when you learn about Christianity and its history and how it began just like all other religions began and how it spread through violence, it tends to put people off, especially when you're learning about the Genesis narrative and how it was largely taken from earlier Mesopotamian myths. Just facts like that that really help you drop faith if you're in it or further solidify non-religion if that's what you're used to. I wrote my first book, Disproving Christianity and Other Secular Writings, in college, and I wrote it because I was taking a literacy and the Bible course, which looked at the Bible from, the New Testament specifically actually, from a literary perspective, analyzing its contradictions, the story elements that are absent in some books of the New Testament and present in others. And that encouraged me to write a book that had a lot of the contradictions and conflicts that the Bible has that people really don't learn about in church. Because growing up in church and going every Sunday to learn, I realized that there was a lot of stuff that they left out of the Bible. And when I published Disproving Christianity in college, that was my main intent, was to get people aware of the contradictions that I had already seen from reading the Bible cover to cover before even going to college, and try and make people more aware of that. But after I graduated, I applied to the graduate program at UCSB for a master's PhD in religious studies, the same program I just did really well in and really enjoyed, so I was excited to work with some of the same professors. When I applied, I had a confrontation, a meeting, it started out as, with the Dean of Admissions for that particular program. What I didn't know at the time was that she came from a theology school before going to be the Dean of Admissions at the Religious Studies program. So she was really used to people already being a Christian, and she was very nice when I first met her. Shook hands, I sat down, she asked me about myself, she asked my name, and she Googled my name, and while I was sitting there, I watched her pull up my Amazon book page for Disproving Christianity and Other Secular Writings. And her face turned white, and she said, "Well, I don't think you're going to fit in our department's milieu because you're an atheist activist with an axe to grind." And I explained to her that my activism and my book had nothing to do with my studies at school, that it never interfered for the 4 years that I'd been attending, and that it wouldn't in a graduate program, and that it was a separate interest. I raised the issue that a Christian who had participated in missionary and gone abroad and did Christian activism wouldn't be excluded from the program simply because of that fact. I had a lot of letters of support in my favor from people. I blogged a little bit about it, and it was picked up by the Washington Post and some really popular atheist blogs. And as a result, the school launched an investigation into it, and eventually I got a formal letter of apology from the person above that person. I didn't accept their offer to reapply and perhaps get into their program. I think everybody understands that I don't want to go back to that school anymore. But I did get a letter of apology, which I see as a really big win. And since that time, I also know that that professor's no longer in that position of authority there, so that's also kind of the important part. A big part of separation of church and state is separation of church and public schools, and UCSB is a public school funded by the government, and they shouldn't be able to discount somebody for being an atheist activist with an axe to grind. So now I want to talk a little bit about Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist, and go into some tips that I have for coming out as an atheist for those who do need such things. This list was actually first published by the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, and basically it just outlines some of the things that you want to do if you are a non-believer and you want to be more public about it, or if you're completely in the atheist closet, then this will be helpful too. But if you're here, then probably not the case. I mean, we all know you. What I was trying to say before is that atheism isn't just, coming out as an atheist isn't just important to your family. If you no longer have family members that care, or your family never cared in the first place, there are still interactions every day that religion comes up and people assume your religiosity. In some parts of the country, not here as much, the first question that you're asked is, what church do you go to? I know that that's really big in the South, and here I've had similar questions. They just assume which religion are you is a question that I get a lot. So in each instance, you have to decide whether or not you're going to disclose your non-belief, whether you think it'll be held against you. And as somebody who it was held against them in a really important situation in my life, that kind of holds true to me. So in the book, I do talk about speaking with your family, but also about educational and professional instances in which you might want to talk about non-belief. So tip number one is find out what it means to you. Like I just mentioned, it means something different to everybody. Maybe you just want to be more open with people you're already talking about it with. You just want to share more of your ideas, or maybe you have somebody in your life who you've pretended to be religious for many years and now you're just finally going to break it to them. But whatever it is, that's the first step, is to kind of look into your life and see whether or not you're being honest with your loved ones. A big part of it is being honest. I find that that's an important quality, so that's why I told my parents when I was 13 that I didn't believe. I just didn't see the value in lying to them. But we all know it's an important balance. There are a lot of people who just simply couldn't handle the news that you don't buy into their myths, so that's always an option as well. Debunk atheist myths is a really important step, and it's something that makes being an atheist difficult is because people in the mainstream generally don't understand what atheism is, that it simply denotes a lack of faith in deities. They think that it means you believe in Satan. They think it means all sorts of things, that you are a nihilist, or basically there are a million myths to debunk, so that's not a difficult task. I devote a large part of the book to defining atheism, which shouldn't take that long to say. You shouldn't believe in, or not believing in gods. But because of all the negative stereotypes and the negative stigma associated with the word atheist, people tend to jump to other descriptors that they think might be softer or easier. They'll say that they're an agnostic, even if they mean that they're an atheist in that context. I, for instance, am an agnostic atheist. I just drop the agnostic label most of the time because I'm just as agnostic about Yahweh as I am about werewolves, so it doesn't seem pertinent. Recognize that it's an ongoing process. As I mentioned before, religious comments, assumptions, they come up every day, whether you're getting knocks on your door from missionaries or just dealing with a friendly person at work and they happen to talk about their church event. You have to decide in each of those moments what you're going to say, how much you're going to say, and do your best, obviously, if that's in your intention, not to offend anybody, which is my primary goal. And in the book, I talk a lot about how to talk about these issues without it being a very conflicting discussion. If you're from a strict religious family, which many people are, I don't want to discount those people, it helps to find somebody to confide in. I put testimonials in Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist from a lot of people who were formerly believers, some people who were formerly training in the ministry, and they came out as an atheist to their family, to their loved ones, to their wives, to their husbands, to their children in some cases. And I put those testimonials in the book because I personally don't have that experience of being strongly religious, and I thought it was important to see it from that perspective as well. But if you are finding somebody close in the family, somebody who might be sympathetic to your cause, whether it's somebody who hasn't broached the subject of religion in the past, you think it might not be a big deal to them, or if it's just somebody who you think might be a secret non-believer themselves, then that's important too. I mentioned that I told my family that I didn't believe pretty much as soon as I knew, when I was 13. And by the time I was 14 or 15, it was completely forgotten about by my fundamentalist religious grandparents and my culturally Christian mom and dad. And that, I think, is just because time heals all wounds, because over time, people tend to realize that your morals haven't changed, that you're still the same person that you were before. They tend to recognize that their son, their uncle, their cousin, their neighbor could be an atheist, and that it doesn't necessarily mean that you are a bad person or a good person. It just means that you don't believe in deities, and that's it. So that's an important step as well. Establishing a new sense of community is always important, and that's a big part of what Atheists United is doing and what a lot of local groups are doing. For a lot of people, religion makes up most of their lives before they become an atheist or before they admit that they're an atheist. And it really helps for people to be able to come together online and offline to interact with other people who have similar ideas. And I want to applaud this group and others for doing exactly that, because that's a big step that helps people come out as an atheist. Conflict in religious discussions is obviously the most important thing. I mean, it's the reason that we're all here. It's the reason that I had to write a book called Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist. It's because people think that you telling them that you don't believe in their deities is an affront to them, and sometimes they see it as an attack. And the reason that is because you're telling them something that they've known their entire lives, that their parents, that their loved ones told them their entire lives. You're telling them that they've been tricked and that it's false, and it can seem like an attack. But in the book, I talk about how to lessen that and how to remember that they're also telling you that you're wrong. I mean, they're telling you that you're wrong about what you believe as well. And try your best just to remember that these types of discussions are ultimately not going to affect your personal relationships. They ultimately shouldn't affect your personal relationships, and that you can be a good person without God, which I think we all know that. And that's the end. So if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to take those now.
We've got a wireless mic here. I'm going to do 4 questions.
Okay. think John Jennings was first there.
So what was your response to the William Lane Craig saying that he don't read Craig? If they go back on the
Yeah, definitely. Recently, somebody in a Q&A section on William Lane Craig's, he's a noted Christian philosopher and apologist, somebody on his Q&A section of his website said that he read Disproving Christianity and he had heard some of Dawkins' lectures on YouTube, and as a result, he was finding it, quote, hard to believe in God. And he was asking William Lane Craig this, and in Craig's answer, he basically told, and I quote, not basically, he said, quit absorbing the infidel material that you've been reading. So basically, he called my book infidel material and said that he should stop absorbing it. And that was his big answer from a noted Christian apologist, how to deal with these books. I'm finding it difficult to believe his answer, don't read it. But he wrote out a big, long essay about how ill-equipped Christians frequently try to interact with secular material and that it is damaging to their faith. And I just read this letter and just laughed. I wrote a response on my website, but it was really funny to watch. His best possible refutation was don't read the material because you're ill-equipped. And I specifically said I would never try to tell a non-believer, I would never ask an atheist to avoid, for instance, the Bible out of fear that its arguments would compel them to believe. I mean, that's just not going to happen. Anyone next? Yeah.
I myself was.
I myself was raised as a Jehovah's Witness.
A little closer.
My mother is pretty much agnostic. Atheist, basically a lot of conversations. I became an atheist first. She put it later on. But I still have family, extended family, who are still Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're basically their definition of atheism is what they get from the Watchtower, which is completely different in what they're brainwashed to believe. How do you bring out the A word to them? Because that's really what it is. How do you bring it out to begin with?
That's why I call my book Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist. It's why I've never tried to hide the fact that I'm an atheist. There are a lot of titles that apply to me. Skeptic's a good one as well. I'm a rationalist, I'm a naturalist, I'm a lot of things. But I specifically use the word atheist as much. I love that this is Atheists United. I use it specifically because of that reason, because people don't know what it is, and if they're in this small church or small organization like the Jehovah's Witnesses are, you really only deal with those people and those ideas. And if you're told all your life that atheists are Satan worshipers and that their only goal is to steal your faith from you and other things that I've heard from Jehovah's Witnesses and other religious groups, it helps to be experienced, just to even any dialogue. I mean, if you just happen to mention that you're an atheist in front of a Jehovah's Witness and they get offended or scared or anything, that type of reaction, and then say, well, what do you think it means? And you can look at a dictionary if that helps. That really helps me prove my point. I mean, does it say anything about Satan in the dictionary definition of atheist? So that's the type of thing. I mean, just the experience, just the fact that they're reacting to it, and the fact that more people around them are coming out as atheists is exactly what I think is the cure for that negative stigma.
Okay, thank you.
I was reading something about Barney Frank, and that when he was in Congress, he came out as a gay man about 30 years ago, and it was only after he retired that he declared that he is an atheist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also knew that as well, and I've heard similar stories. I've heard people tell me both ways. I mean, that it could be worse one way or the other, or better one way or the other, and it's true. I mean, it depends on your family, it depends on where you are, your culture, your society, your specific household, and so it really, there are a lot of factors there.
I'm going to make my way across. So we have plenty of time for questions, so everybody's going to get a chance to ask questions. I think we have about half hour, 45 minutes for questions, so everyone's going to get a chance. And then with this mic, a little tech thing here. So after you're done answering the question, just flip it off and pass it back. That'll keep the background noise on this wireless down. So here's the next question. Did I get everybody on this side? Okay, I'm gonna get this one, and then Chapman, and then we'll go across. So just pass it back out to you.
I'm just curious if you subscribe to the Christ myth theory, or if you actually think that Jesus was an actual human that walked the earth, and on the historical writings of Flavius Josephus and Tacitus, if those were Christian apologists that added some of the Christ stuff in, or if they actually had historical documentation the validity of his existence and crucifixion?
I get that question a lot, and as somebody who studied religions and not the historical nature of Christianity, I wouldn't consider myself an expert on this by any means. I will say that the majority of experts in that field, Bart Ehrman leading the way in that way, would say that he was a historical person. I personally don't hold any belief either way, and in the end, it really doesn't matter to me whether or not he was a real person. He wasn't a person who existed who could walk on water and turn water into wine and resurrect himself and others. And I try to emphasize that that's really the point. It's even possible, and in fact, many would argue likely, that the Jesus story was put together based on a few stories from wandering preachers in that time. And it would make it unrecognizable to the original person. The original person, if he existed, would have been married, for instance, which would also explain why there's a large chunk of time missing in the Jesus story. There are a lot of things that would make the real person, if there were one, completely different from the myth, and therefore, in my opinion, not really that important to discuss.
There it is. Okay. Sorry. I am an ex-fundamentalist Christian, just within the last 2 years left behind that religion. And I kind of want to challenge your last two tips a bit. I'm trying to remember exactly how they were written, but time heals all wounds, and the last one was, you mentioned something about how it shouldn't fundamentally change a relationship. My parents and my husband's parents and almost all of our extended family are still extremely fundamentalist Christians, and it has dramatically changed our relationship. And time is helping, but it certainly hasn't healed all wounds, and that tension remains. Whenever I am discussing raising my children and telling them about evolution or anything that's opposed to their views, such as there is no God, the tension is palpable in the relationship. And I used to communicate with my parents regularly, and now I'm like, every couple of weeks we'll just say hi and then call it good. So I'm just wondering how you advise people in that kind of a situation.
It's one of the toughest points, and you're right that a lot of times it doesn't go how in theory it should go. And in the book I have testimonials from people who have similar experiences, who their family just hasn't regained their original relationship yet. But like you said, it does get better with time. Not 100% better yet for you, but you just said that it is getting a little better, and I think the best way to do that is continue either. I mean, there are really two options. You can avoid the topic completely and try and skirt it entirely, or you can try and expose them as much as possible, and assuming that they're willing to listen. There are certain people who will simply never listen to your opinion or listen to facts, but trying is not a bad thing.
I'm with the lady in the red up front there. I have the same situation. I went to church Wednesdays for Bible studies, Friday for youth group, Saturday the youth choir, and then Sunday morning and evening services. Wow. Oh yeah. But yeah, it's a long road. But there is that. I've come out to to all my friends and most people at work, but my mother, I just look at her as fragile, and I find it difficult to come out to her. And that was going to be my question. How do you, isn't it just best to leave that alone?
There's also a part in the book where I discuss exactly that, where there are certain people or instances in which case it's either irrelevant or you think that it'll be so damaging to them that it won't be worth revealing the truth. And just like everything, that's the case. But it doesn't hurt to weigh your options and kind of gauge whether or not the person would be open to that type of discussion, or whether or not you think it'd be better just to keep the topic off the table completely.
Question to the back. I wanted to say. Turn it on right here? Yeah, just flip the switch off.
It's nice to know that they loved you for you and not so much your religious beliefs. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Do we have the mic up here?
This is a really dumb question. And I submit to your learned position. You talked about Christian apologists.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what are they apologizing for?
So Christian apologists do the exact same thing that Buddhist apologists or Muslim apologists or any type of apologist does, which is to bend the meaning of their text to meet their particular needs. So things no longer mean what they originally meant in the apologist world. You can change anything you want pretty much to make an argument, and there's a lot of philosophy involved. And I just can't imagine anyone believing an apologist when they see that other religions also have apologists, because they do the exact same thing. I kind of want to see a debate between a Christian and a Muslim apologist where they talk about how their meanings are different in their versions of their Quran, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah. This needs an explanation.
Question? You came out as an atheist to your parents when you were 13.
Yes.
Did you also have to come out to your friends at 13? And did you experience any ostracizing or maybe bullying? I'm sorry. Thank you.
Most of my friends, I remember talking to my friends about it as well. They knew that I went to church. I actually went to church with them as part of my studies and interest in the various religions. I had a Mormon girlfriend in high school that I went to church with her all the time. And my friends, I just generally tagged along, and we really didn't talk about, I mean, I assume it's because they didn't know much about their religion. They're still in the process of being indoctrinated into their faith, so they might not know as much to condemn me to hell yet. But I did tag along to their church events all the time, and just kind of wondered if they really believed it or not was kind of my main question growing up. And then I realized one day that they really do, a lot of them.
I've been writing the advice column on Friendly Atheist for 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, I've received hundreds and hundreds of letters, more than I can ever respond to. And the vast majority of them are from young people with one of two quandaries. One, they're pulled by this irresistible desire to tell the truth to their parents. It's burning. And I've tried to come to understand that, how come that is so passionate with some people. It's not just that they're sick and tired of going to church, it's deeper than that. And then the other quandary is they have come out, they have told, and the poop has hit the propeller in a big way. And all of their fears have come true. And I don't really have a question other than I just want to really thank you for creating this resource, because I've been wanting to include in my responses a referral to something that's written specifically for them, what to do, what not to do, and don't step on that one. And also the thing that I've often, it sounds like, I haven't read your book yet, but it sounds like you believe in finding the right balance between the principle of honesty and the pragmatics of taking care of yourself.
Definitely.
And I get challenged on that, because I sometimes have simply advised kids to lie, because you're definitely not going to be rewarded for your honesty.
Yeah, I want to touch on both those topics, okay. Actually. On the urge to tell people or tell your family or whatever that you're describing, I would say that I felt that same thing. As soon as I realized that my family thought that I believed and that they believed as well, I wanted to let them know that that was not the case. And from personal experience, that came out of honesty. I felt because I've been taught that honesty was important by my family, I thought that they wouldn't hold it against me to be honest with them. I thought that there's no way that I could get in trouble for just telling the truth about something that really has no effect on them, on me, on anything really. I was still attending church with them too. It wasn't even that I wanted to stop. I was continuing to go to church. I just wanted to let them know I'm going to continue, but I just don't believe in it. So that's a very natural urge. I understand that. As far as the second concern, when they've already told their family and it didn't go well, that comes from not being prepared for that type of thing, which is exactly what the book I'm hoping will help prevent. But it generally comes out in like an argument, for instance. Maybe they'll try to tell them to go to church and it'll just come out in discussion and kind of in a rude, irrational way. And I find that when things are done irrationally, that's not their best way. And so that's actually what I'm trying to help. And I enjoy Friendly Atheist too, so. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hi. To what extent do you think it is possible for atheists, Christians, and people from various beliefs or non-beliefs to cooperate, work together to find solutions to problems and sustainable answers to some of the pressing issues that confront all humans, regardless of their beliefs?
Luckily, most people don't allow Christianity, religion of any kind, to get in the middle of that type of dialogue. It's really the fundamentalists, on whether it's somebody who hates religion and won't talk to anybody who is religious or won't accept their ideas. I like to stress that there are a lot of people who used to be religious and that they're only guilty of wishful thinking and arguably gullibility, but they're not bad people, they're not dumb people. There are a lot of religious people with great ideas that could help humanity, and I'm not going to disregard those because the source is somebody who believes in something that I don't. So I encourage discussion in between all faiths and non-faiths, and cooperation between all faiths and non-faiths. And on my Facebook page, on my website, I have discussions like that, helpful discussions with believers and non-believers who come on to voice their specific ideas. And I think that as long as everybody remains rational and doesn't result to arguing about religion like is typically argued about religion, then it really goes a long way.
Pass the mic up front there, and then we'll get to you back there. Let's look it up. Norman.
Hello. Sorry. My name's Alan. I'm from Glendale. So oftentimes religion and I guess nationalism is combined. Let's say in Judaism, or probably not Islam, but Christianity, some, I guess, denominations of Christianity. I have come out as an atheist to my family, but a pressing issue is whether, how I'll raise my children. Should I baptize my children, or me, myself, should I go through marriage with the church? And what do you think about that as far as pragmatism versus principle goes?
Yeah, there are a lot of complex issues there, and in the book I have testimonials from people who are in similar situations, so you can kind of see how it went for them and hopefully gain some helpful insights from that. It really does come down to just weighing the pros and cons and finding out whether or not you're principally against. I personally would never have a wedding in a church, but I also wouldn't hold it against anyone who chose to do that to make their family feel comfortable. The good thing about being an atheist is there's no unifying doctrine or creed that you have to live by, and you don't have to forego your favorite holidays or weddings or anything like that just because you're an atheist. You're welcome to do so, but that's not something that hinges on your lack of belief. So that's what I really like about the fact that atheism just means lack of deities. You can do anything else you want as long as you feel it's the right thing to do, then I say go for it.
My name is Henry, and I started the first atheist club, outright atheist club in my high school, Burbank High.
Great, congratulations, good job.
Yeah. And my friend, and he started his first philosophy club, which is borderline atheist in his magnet school, Clark. And I was wondering, is it the smart thing to do, like, let's say when it comes to college apps, and like when colleges ask, how are you a leader? And then you say, oh, I started my first atheist club. Do you think that's the smart thing to do? Do you think you might get discriminated subliminally from your...
I can tell you that I've experienced the same exact situation, and I've really, I've been applying to jobs in journalism, in mainstream journalism, for instance, after college, where I listed my books as publications that I just, in the spirit of trying to be open and transparent. I've seen negative feedback and I've seen positive feedback. I would say in a college entrance essay that really does show what they're looking for, which is the leadership abilities, and the fact that you started something that wasn't at your school before is a really big deal. I know that if I were an administrator reading that application, I would see that favorably, and I know a lot of others would too, but in the end it's really up to you.
You might want to put non-sectarian club.
Yeah, maybe use some language that...
Got a question back here?
Do you think atheism and Buddhism are incompatible?
No, a lot of Buddhists are atheists. A lot of Buddhists are also believers in multiple deities. It really depends on the type of Buddhism. I wouldn't say that you could be, I mean, Buddhism is a religion, so if you subscribe to Buddhism, you are religious, but you can still be a religious atheist. There are Taoists, there are Buddhists, there are pagans, Satanists, theistic Satanists. These are all people who would be religious and not believe in deities. So no, I mean, I don't have anything against Buddhism in particular. I've written about how debunking the common myth that religion isn't, or that Buddhism isn't a religion, and I've also written about violence in Buddhism, for instance, in Burma by their Buddhist-controlled government. But that's really to point out the fact that people in Western society generally have a sensitized version of Buddhism, and they might not understand it or its original, for example, supernatural concepts like karma and reincarnation that were in it originally, that a lot of people have separated from it now. So yeah, I know a lot of Buddhists who are atheists and a lot of Buddhists who aren't, and it really just depends on their sect of Buddhism.
Is it easy to generalize which sects of Buddhism are compatible with atheism and which aren't?
I would say Zen Buddhism is the most common. I think they kind of try to channel most of the philosophical teachings of Buddhism without holding on to the dogma part. I would say that's the most common use, but there are others as well.
Do we have any other questions? Looks like 1, 2, and we got plenty more time. Okay.
Hi. I just want to know what is your opinion about the Unitarian Church?
About the what?
Unitarian Universalist Church.
From what I understand, that's a church that kind of accepts everybody and they worship nothing, or I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I've seen no violence associated with Unitarian Universalists, so I wouldn't condemn it in any way. I think a lot of people, a lot like this meeting, a lot like Atheists United, people who are no longer religious might seek out universal Unitarian churches because they enjoy the sense of togetherness that church brought them when they were religious. And I think that that's one way to do it. You can also go to, I think there are these atheist churches springing up, like singing type of churches and stuff too. And then there are these atheist groups. There are a lot of ways to deal with that sense of community, and that's not an unhealthy way.
The singing type of church, or the church without God, is more like the secular, the Sunday assembly that's happening in a couple of weeks from now. So if you are interested in something like that, there is something coming up like that.
Thanks for being here. Do you ever get into knockdown, drag out verbal fights with, like, my brother and I? We are like, we'll send emails back and forth, and I get energized by it, and it really. And the other thing I like about it is it forces me to look stuff up, and you know, like I'll use his, like he was using Darwin's black box as this, but he didn't realize that the author of that book believes in evolution.
Yeah.
It was just such a nice feeling to make him aware of this, you know?
Most of my discussions, luckily, they remain very, very civil, and that's because I'm actually writing an essay about this right now, but it's because I stick to the facts in the discussion. I never let any of their insults steer me away, or their changing, moving the goalposts. I never let any of that really change the discussion. I just stick to the original. Normally my question is, do you have physical, empirical evidence of the existence of deities? And if you don't, then I really don't carry the conversation much further, because I'm a person who believes in proof, and I wouldn't accept it without that. So if you're going to work with philosophical arguments, there's really no point in discussing with me, because I believe in evidence, and that's where my beliefs are going to follow there. But I have tons of discussions. I put them on Facebook for other people to learn from, and I find that most of them are helpful in the long run. Either I learn something about their position. I mean, I've heard so many arguments already. I put top 20 frequently asked questions in the back of Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist, where I answer in depth most of the questions that I've received in the past. But I really do enjoy long discussions that help me learn about the other side, and the only reason I was having this back and forth with William Lane Craig that I discussed earlier was because I was reading his website and saw that he was talking about my book and how it's infidel material. So yeah, I love those types of discussions too, and they can be really helpful as long as you stay on point.
Any other questions? I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So you said that you wouldn't condemn any group as long as they're nonviolent. So even if it's a religious group, it's okay. But how do you then answer the argument where religion gives you the ability, or religion teaches you flawed reasoning? Right? I mean, you could, certain religions or certain leaders in religions will tell you that fossils were just buried there by people who are conspiring to make evolution seem like that is the way, and they're lying to you. Yep. Now, that's an extreme version of that, but on the sort of moderate version of that, you're still using flawed reasoning in one aspect of your life. How does that not leak over to other reasoning, and how is it then still not condemnable?
It does, and it is. And I should be clear, when I say I don't condemn a religion, I mean people are free to practice any religion they wish, and I would never try to stop that in any way. But in the same way, I can also talk about those religions and the conflicts with their scriptures and the problems with that faith, and I do that all the time regardless of the religion or the idea. So I would consider myself a skeptic, and on my page I discuss other false reasoning, other false ideas, other unsubstantiated beliefs, that whether it is related to ghosts, psychics, or vaccine scares. I mean, I really cover the gamut, and I discuss a lot of things on my page because I think that unsubstantiated beliefs and lack of critical thinking cause problems in all walks of life. I would recommend also, there's a website called What's the Harm? I think it's just what'stheharm.com, and it talks about each supernatural belief, or I mean, it goes even to moon landing deniers, really anything, and talks about what's the harm with it, and what monetary costs people have lost, stories about people who got ripped off by psychics for millions of dollars, and people who, religious cults, and really cool resource for that type of information.
As long as we have a few extra minutes, I'll expand the discussion a little bit here with you on stage, but I'm going to need the audience to help me with this question, and then let you expand on it. So in my progression to this stage right here, right now, it was from Judaism as a kid to agnosticism to atheism. But in that transition, I knew that I was an atheist before I was willing to admit it. I was very comfortable saying openly I'm an agnostic, because that seemed to be a softer sort of way of talking to other people. I felt like if I was saying I'm an atheist, I'm ready to do battle. I gotta get ready to debate, or I have to get ready to defend myself, or I feel like I'm coming from the point of I felt there was a nervousness, there was a sort of an aggression when you just say the word atheist, which kind of comes back to the good thing that Atheists United, that it has Atheists United, but then there's also a bad thing. Sometimes people will write in and say, well, are agnostics accepted? And of course, yes, agnostics, free thinkers, it's all encompassing, but that word was chosen for reasons back 30 years ago. But I'm curious from the audience here, how many are either in your path to atheism, if you've gotten there yet, or if you're still agnostic, how many as atheists today who made the transition through agnosticism felt like you had to hold on to agnosticism for a little bit longer than you needed to, or have just said agnostic sometimes, even though you knew you were an atheist. So I'm just curious, is there anybody that used the word agnostic because you were afraid or didn't want to get into the fight or the headache of using the word atheism? That's really interesting. About a good third of the group is just
add to that
shy.
Add to that anyone who's used bright or secularist or humanist or free thinker or anything else only because of the word atheist and that you thought that others might react negatively.
and that's a good portion of the crowd. So in a way, it really is good that we're kind of taking back the word in a sense, where we're in the AIDS Walk and we have Atheists United in big letters there to let people know that this is what atheism is. I think people have a fairly warm or an okay acceptance of the word agnosticism. They don't seem threatened by it. I get that sometimes, where somebody's threatened by the word atheism. It doesn't put them on guard. Maybe that's what it is. When I say I'm an atheist, somebody gets defensive right away, including me. I get ready to defend my position. So it's interesting to see that word still has an aggressive tone.
Many people also think that the word atheist means that you believe 100% certainly that there are no deities that exist. And that's also a common misconception that I talk about in the book, because atheist means you don't believe, but that doesn't mean that you don't believe. It's a possibility. I would say that I don't think it's possible that Jesus came to this earth and walked on water, but I wouldn't preclude the possibility of some general deity who was originally who created everything and then never touched us or intervened or discussed anything, because that's simply an unfalsifiable concept, and I don't really discuss those. But it's because of a common misconception about atheism that people tend to use those other terms. Like I mentioned before, I am an agnostic atheist because I don't claim to know anything. So in that sense, we're all agnostics in that we don't know anything with certainty. But I just want to add that.
I've been an atheist. Never was an agnostic, and when I was a young man I heard a joke that I always loved, which is that an agnostic is a person who doesn't believe in God but doesn't want to say so out loud for fear that God will hear him. And when I first heard that, I amended it immediately to an agnostic is a person who doesn't believe in God but doesn't want to say so out loud for fear that society will. And I think that's been the case. Every agnostic is an atheist. If you don't have a belief in God, you're at least atheistic if you don't want to use the term atheist. So there's really not a divide between the two. They're just two different kinds of koalas.
Completely agreed, and I'm going to be using that joke.
I just want to add something to that. Every agnostic, I think some agnostics, so they think the question is beyond us. So it's not whether they do or don't believe, though. Sometimes they think that it's just not even possible for us as human beings to comprehend a power like that.
That's a different question.
They don't have a belief in God. They're atheistic. They're without.
Whether or not we can know if they don't believe. Yeah, if you don't actively participate in the belief of a deity, you are atheistic. Yes, that's.
Just a quick anecdote on the Atheist Walk, the AIDS Walk that we did. I was there with my wife and my son, and we were taking pictures, and one of those, we had a group picture. The people that were taking pictures should have that somewhere. We were taking a picture, and some guy sprung from behind us and went like this. I got photobombed
by Satan. Wow. Okay. I just wanted to say, for me, it's always dependent on the audience. When I first told my parents I didn't believe, I just said I'm a non-believer. I didn't even say agnostic because that would have been scary to them. So, but I had already admitted to my husband that I was an atheist, and I had already admitted to other people that I was an atheist. It's just, I think for me, it always just depends on the audience. And if I'm speaking with someone that I know has a misconception or some sort of a negative reaction to something, then I soften it in that moment. But then, since then, 9 months later, I did admit to her that I was an atheist, and it's become more accepted as I gave her more time to heal over it.
That's exactly right, though, that it depends on the situation. I mean, if somebody in general just comes up to me and asks me what church I go to or if I'm religious, I just say I'm not superstitious and end it there. But there are other people when you'd be more soft approach.
Are atheists antichrist?
That's a common question, but atheists don't believe in the divinity of Christ, but I don't think that they would be the Antichrist, no. Obama, however.
Go ahead. That's right. Check, check. Okay, there we go. So you kind of sound like you had a life that was more easy to kind of walk out of. I think some of us don't have that. I still haven't come out to my father, but do you think that do you think it's better for people that have had this really super strong religion in their family and had a bad fallout? Do you think that, I guess I'm trying to ask, what kind of interviews did you do with people to get a better perspective? Because it sounds like maybe your perspective isn't the best type of perspective to write a book.
Yeah, that's true. My grandparents, who I lived with for a long time, are and were fundamentalist Christians, and they took me to their church, and I saw that church, but I also saw many others, and I never believed. So you're right that I felt going into this, as someone who was dealing mostly with coming out as an atheist in a professional educational setting, that I wanted to talk to as many people as possible who had situations in their family that were more conflicting. So in the process of writing the book, I solicited people to send in their atheist testimonials, their coming out stories to my website, and I published, I think, close to 50 different testimonials from people who just wanted to tell their story, some of them anonymous, some of them not anonymous, just telling how they told their parents how they were atheists, or their family, or their friends, or their colleagues. I chose the top 6 to publish in the book, and I think half of those are from people who were training to become ministers or in the clergy and had strong relationships that depended upon religion. And so by reading those and by talking with those people, it really helped me gain a better understanding of that. I'll never claim to understand it as well as somebody who's been in that perspective or been in that situation. But it did help me see the kinds of conflicts that arise and talk about it in the book. But mostly I find that their testimonials kind of speak for themselves in that regard, because you can see the choices that they took, that they made, and then their hindsight reactions to those choices and how it affected their life.
There is a mic. We'll go back here and then we'll come back here. For the camera. For the camera.
I was raised atheist, so it was never a conflict for me. But I do point out when people ask me about my religious beliefs, that I'm a non-believer, that I'm an atheist, sort of loud and proud. And when Christians start giving me a really hard time, I just point out that it is a part of their religion to turn the other cheek and to be accepting. And, you know, my view has always been, you show me a fundamentalist or a really ardent Christian, and I'll show you a hypocrite.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at the Bible itself, you'll find that it's a hypocrite in itself. You have in Deuteronomy that you stone all non-believers, and then you also have turn the other cheek. So as a Christian, you have to weigh those, find out which fits your personal opinions better, and then accept that as your mantra.
I mean, it's totally ridiculous. And it's all fairy stories in the Bible, and you point that out to people. I mean, seriously, 70-year-olds having babies, they didn't even live till 70.
We got a question.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, well, you know, if I'm willing to be convinced, like if you could show me proof that there is a God, then I would change my mind.
I'm one of those people.
A believer friend of mine said, well, what could convince you to me? And I said, well, if you could show me, if somebody said, hey, I'm God, and prove it to me. And then I thought, well, actually, if somebody came up to me and said, hey, I'm God, I would say, actually, you sound kind of crazy, and I don't believe you. So there's actually nothing that could convince me that there is a God.
I know a lot of people who say exactly that. It really depends on the person's claims. I mean, there are so many deities, thousands of deities that have existed. You'd have to prove beyond a preponderance of evidence that that particular deity exists. I mean, in our world, that doesn't happen. However, if someone said, I have a deity who can spontaneously do that, they describe the parameters of the deity was able to be measured under scientific observable conditions, and they could perform the so-called miracles that were then discovered to have only come from divine authorities, then, I mean, that'd be the type of scrutiny that I'd require, and then that paper would have to be peer-reviewed. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I would require, but I wouldn't say that it's impossible.
How would that be different from a witch, maybe, or a wizard, or how would you know that it would be
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I would have to say that I'm agnostic towards the supernatural. The supernatural aspects could be proven if under those circumstances. I guess that you couldn't claim that it was a specific deity unless, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of specifics that would have to go into that. Jesus, please spell your name. And
I had a testimonial. I was raised in Catholic boarding school for 10 years, living there. So I was really indoctrinated. And when I was 17, one day I was waiting to go to Mass, and I wanted to go to the beach, so I went to the beach. And I realized I didn't believe anymore, and I was horrified. And I was 17, and I went down to St. Patrick's to Archbishop Fulton Sheen's office. And I went in, I don't know if you all remember him, he was the TV Archbishop. And I went in and I said to his secretary, I have to speak to Archbishop Sheen. And she said, why? I said, I've lost my faith. She said, oh, he has better things to do than talk to you about that, and sent me on my way. So I became an atheist.
Well, apparently you didn't have William Lane Craig to contact and tell you to stop thinking about it.
No, one thing I noticed in your experience as a boy, a young boy, one way you dealt with it, which was, I don't know what the word would be, but maybe a weaning process. You still went to church, even though you didn't believe, so the relatives and such, didn't, even if you mentioned it to them, it wasn't as real as
long as I was still going to church.
Yeah, right.
Okay with it.
So that's,
well, I still go to churches now, so they should be happy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well,
go to a mosque too, but they wouldn't like that as much.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard.
All the way. There we go.
There we go. Say again.
What is your favorite method for turning on someone to critical thinking?
I'm sorry. What was that?
What is your favorite method for turning on someone to critical thinking?
I mean, it's really something you can't just do in a discussion. I spend my whole life, all my presence, all my writings, whether I'm publishing something on my own website or Richard Dawkins or on my Facebook, I'm always trying to promote critical thought, whether it's something in the news and I just want to share an article and say, what do you think about the scientific evidence of this claim? Or just pointing out the fact that when people have religious experiences, that they're anecdotal experiences, like, well, I feel it and I experience Jesus for myself. It's just the same as somebody who thinks that they were abducted by aliens or that they saw Sasquatch. I feel that in treating everything the same, religions and superstitions and other non-critical thinking faculties, it really helps people see that they are the same, whether they're religious or not. So the people who used to yell at me when I published Disproving Christianity about how I just hate Christianity and I don't really, I'm not an atheist, I just hate the Christian God, and I like to point out that I'm also discussing vaccines and 9/11 and discussing anything else that has to do with critical thought or evidence-based thinking.
I think one of the things that you're going to be seeing now, and this is through experience with my family, I have a brother who's very religious, and he's actually an elder of his church, and he's much younger than I am, so he's an elder by the strength of his faith, I suppose, more than everybody else, because he's not an elder. But anyways, we were talking about knowledge, and one of the things now that the second time, because this is the second time I heard it, was knowledge is going to be the proof of end of time, because through knowledge we're going to be so knowledgeable that we're drifting away from God. So
it makes sense if you line it up with the story of Adam and Eve and the tree of knowledge. It makes sense that would lead you to evil things, and it's tradition for religions, especially organized churches, to fear the oncoming of science and scientific progression for those very reasons. But at the same time, that's not like a verse in the Bible that says that that'll bring on the end of the world. So.
No, actually it is. Or at least he texted me one that said,
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, Luke, whatever, and the man will go back and forth through knowledge and lose what, how
I remember
the Bible is. Yeah, it does that. So.
We got a question up here. And then you didn't get to ask your question there. We'll pass it back to you after. So bring the mic up here. And then we'll pass it, you can pass it forward. Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Jesus. The only time you can say that sincerely. Thank you, Jesus. Seriously.
During your lecture, you were talking about how it's important to not be offensive when you're talking about your atheism to, let's say, your peers, your family members. And I was debating what's the more effective thing to do. Is it more like the militant atheism, like Christopher Hitchens, peace be upon him, or like let's say academic atheists like Chomsky? What's the more effective way getting your atheism across in your face, telling you that you're wrong, like Hitchens used to do that, or Chomsky being the more?
I mean, I don't think that both are I think that you can do both. I think that you can tell somebody that they're wrong and still do it in a rational way and from a perspective that they might understand. I have an album on my Facebook page called Secular Activism is Working. And in that album, I just have screenshots from emails and Facebook messages and people who sent me saying that it was them just they happened to see something on my page and then read some of my non-confrontational writings, and it got them to think about it. And by seeing all those testimonials from people who either used to be religious or were on the fence and are now not on the fence and fully on board with evidence-based thinking, by seeing all those testimonials, it really makes me think that at least my way is doing well for me. So I'm not going to caution anyone else to do anything differently, but I do find that by refusing to sink down to arguments like you would be arguing with somebody over something that didn't matter. I mean, it's a really important discussion. It should be treated academically, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just wanted to share how I came out to my grandmother real quickly. She is a non-practicing Catholic. So when she and I were discussing religion, she was asking me, we're talking about it, and she asked me, are you still a Jehovah's Witness? No, I'm not. And then she's like, well, what are you? Well, I'm not a believer anymore. I'd consider myself agnostic. At this point, I wanted to give the definition first and then use the word atheism. So
makes sense,
right? So just to make that good, because I didn't want to, have that lasting first impression to get stuck in her mind. So so I told her, well, I'm agnostic in the sense that I don't know if there's a God or not, but because I don't know if there's a God or not, then it naturally follows I don't have a belief in a God. So in that sense, I'm an atheist. And she's like, okay. And it sort of turned in her mind. But when I
think you just quoted my book.
Oh, okay. but what actually happened was that when I told her I was an agnostic, the first thing that came out of her mouth was, but not an atheist.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, because I don't know if there's a God or not, it follows I don't have a belief in a God. But I'm not an atheist in the sense where I dogmatically state there is no God. And then she,
you're an atheist now.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it worked out. I could see the gears turning in her head, how she processed that, and then it made sense to her. But she's also not too religious. She's non-practicing Catholic. She's not, into it. So she was more open to that. So
I have a very good friend of mine who was in a pretty much identical situation with his mom, who he always thought wasn't very religious. But when he mentioned that he was agnostic, her first words were, at least you're not an atheist. And he said, why not? And she said, well, you don't want to ruin your life, was her direct quote. And he's like, well, I don't know what that means, but I mean, if you define atheist as someone who doesn't actively believe deities exist, then I would be an atheist. And since that time, their relationship was a little bit strained, but that particular instance stuck in my head because at least you're not an atheist. But I mean, most people who are agnostics don't believe in God. So I really like the way you put it, though, that naturally follows you don't hold a belief in that which you don't know.
Right, yeah, that's why I put the definition first, and then I used this is atheist instead of the other way around, instead of saying atheist first, and then try to overcome that.
Debunk atheist myths, one of the most important tips.
Okay, we got a question in the back. Why don't you shout it out?
Sure. So the whole labeling and identification of atheist versus agnostic, and part of what turned me on to this meeting was reading The God Delusion, and he Dawkins puts a little time into discussing the difference between agnosticism and atheism. And if I understand it correctly, it's that agnostics believe that the existence of God cannot be proven or disproven.
It's exactly true.
But an atheist believes that the existence of a creator God should be a scientifically testable hypothesis.
If you're a strong, Dawkins sets out a scale, 1 to 7. If you're a 7, you're somebody who says, she would be a 7 who says it's physically impossible to prove deities exist, and that's the strong atheist position. And then the next one down would be de facto atheist, which is what I would consider myself, what Dawkins considers himself, and what most scientifically minded people would probably consider themselves. And that's somebody who doesn't believe in deities, but also wouldn't say for certain that you can prove or disprove that assertion.
Michael, if they could use the microphone, because we can't hear them out there.
Okay, all right, good, thanks. One more reason to use the mic. Okay. I'm not sure if you mentioned this or not yet, but did you say what was on your shirt yet?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Let's see what.
If religion were the key to morality, then
if religion were the key to morality, then mega churches would look more like charities and less like $1 million businesses.
I have about 70 shirts in my online store. It's called Secular Store. You can get there through my website, davidgmcafee.com, or just search Secular Store on Google. And 10% of all proceeds go to the March of Dimes. And I have a lot of cool shirts.
Awesome. I want to mention that next month we're going to have Ian Harris, a comic, so another great event. But I want to thank you because I don't know if we're going to get it. Thank you.